In 1982, a man walked into a hotel room in Los Angeles carrying a briefcase. Inside that briefcase was roughly 60 pounds of cocaine worth approximately $6.5 million. The man wasn't a cartel boss or a street-level dealer. He was the founder of one of the most ambitious car companies in American history. And what happened next would destroy everything he had spent a decade building. John DeLorean didn't grow up with money. He grew up in Detroit, the son of a Ford factory worker, watching cars roll off assembly lines he couldn't afford to ride in. He studied engineering. He clawed through corporate ladders. And by the time he was in his 40s, he had done something almost no one in Detroit had ever done. He had made General Motors cool. He created the GTO. He turned Pontiac from a slow-selling afterthought into a muscle car legend. He ran Chevrolet. He earned a base salary of $200,000 a year with bonuses that pushed his total compensation to $650,000. He had a Fifth Avenue duplex, a supermodel wife. The whole world was watching him, waiting for him to take over the most powerful automaker on earth. And then he quit. Not because he was fired, not because he failed, because he had a bigger idea. He was going to build his own car, his own company, on his own terms. No shareholders breathing down his neck, no corporate politics, just a machine that was smarter, safer, and more visionary than anything Detroit had ever produced. The car was called the DMC-12. Gull-wing doors that opened like wings, a stainless steel body that looked like it had arrived from another decade. A sports car built on principles, not just profit. And when DeLorean started pitching it, people believed him. Money came pouring in from investors, celebrities, and private backers who saw the same thing he did. A revolution on four wheels. There was just one problem, and it was already getting worse. The design kept changing. Engines were scrapped and redesigned. Deadlines collapsed. Costs ballooned. DeLorean needed a factory, and he needed government money to build it. So he made a decision that would quietly begin unraveling everything. He took his company to Northern Ireland. Not a neutral business decision. Belfast in the late 1970s was deep in the troubles. A sectarian war that had claimed hundreds of lives. The British government was desperate to create jobs and stabilize the region. DeLorean was desperate for cash. They needed each other. The British government put up approximately $120 million of the company's $200 million startup costs. Construction began. Thousands of workers were hired. For a moment, it looked like everyone was going to win. That moment didn't last. In 1981, the DMC-12 finally hit American showrooms. The gull-wing doors opened with a hiss. Crowds gathered. Waiting lists formed. It felt like a triumph. But underneath the glamour, the numbers were brutal. The company estimated it needed to sell somewhere between 10 and 12,000 units a year just to break even. Independent analysts had already warned this was unlikely. They were right. Reviews came back cold. The car was underpowered. The engine produced just 130 horsepower, slower than rivals costing far less. Quality control issues piled up. And then the American economy collapsed into recession. Sales across the entire auto industry cratered. By the end of 1981, the factory had produced around 7,500 cars. They had only managed to sell 3,000 of them. The factory in Belfast was hemorrhaging cash, and the British government was done writing checks. By early 1982, DeLorean Motor Company was functionally dead. They just hadn't announced it yet. DeLorean needed money, not gradually, not through a restructuring plan. He needed an enormous amount of cash, immediately, from somewhere that wouldn't ask too many questions. And that is when a man named James Hoffman walked back into his life. Hoffman wasn't a businessman. He was a convicted drug smuggler, an FBI informant. He had met DeLorean through a mutual contact, and now he was making calls again. The FBI saw an opening. They launched an undercover sting. Agents posed as traffickers. Meetings were arranged. Everything was wired. Everything was filmed. What happened next is still debated. On October 19, 1982, John DeLorean walked into a Los Angeles hotel room and met with men he believed could save his company. The cameras were already running. Federal agents were already waiting. And in that room, DeLorean was filmed holding a briefcase of cocaine and saying words no corporate founder should ever say on federal videotape. He was arrested minutes later. Nearly 60 pounds of cocaine, $6.5 million worth in that room alone. The full scheme the government alleged would have moved $24 million of the drug. And one of the most famous names in American industry in handcuffs before the day was over. 8 days later, the receivers moved into the Belfast factory. The assembly line stopped mid-build. 2,500 workers walked out for the last time. Over $120 million of British taxpayer money gone. The stainless steel cars sat frozen on the line, going nowhere. Everything DeLorean had promised those workers, those investors, that government. It was over in a single week. The trial began in 1984. The prosecution had videotape. The defense had one argument: entrapment. They said Hoffman, a paid government informant with his own criminal record and his own financial incentive, had manufactured the crime. That DeLorean had been a desperate man pushed into a corner and then filmed walking through a door he never would have opened alone. The jury deliberated. The world waited. On August 16, 1984, the jury acquitted John DeLorean on all charges. The verdict shocked federal prosecutors. Outside the courthouse, DeLorean smiled for cameras and thanked his legal team. But the acquittal did not restore what had been lost. The company was dead. The factory was shuttered. Around 9,000 cars scattered across dealer lots and private collections across America. Many of them sat unsold. The DeLorean brand, which had been built on the promise of visionary independence, was permanently associated with cocaine, desperation, and collapse. The financial wreckage extended far beyond the DeLorean family. Investors who had put millions into the company received almost nothing in return. 2,500 employees in Dunmurry, who had taken jobs at the factory as an escape from the unemployment and violence that defined life in 1980s Belfast, were back where they started. Several civil lawsuits were filed by investors alleging fraud. DeLorean spent years fighting legal battles on multiple fronts. He filed for personal bankruptcy in 1999. The DMC-12 itself survived in a strange way. Because the cars were stainless steel and built to an unusually high structural standard, many of them still run today. A company called DeLorean Motor Company of Texas, founded in 1995 by a British entrepreneur named Stephen Wynn, now services, restores, and supplies parts for surviving cars using original and newly engineered components. The gull-wing doors still open with that same cinematic hiss. The car became iconic not for its performance but for its appearance in the Back to the Future films. Released in 1985, 3 years after the arrest, 1 year after the acquittal. There is a deep irony in the fact that the machine John DeLorean built to prove something about independence and integrity became immortal as a time machine in a Hollywood comedy. DeLorean spent the years after the trial giving interviews, pursuing new ventures, and maintaining until his death in 2005 that he had been targeted, manipulated, and ultimately wronged by the federal government. Whether that was entirely true or only partly true, the record shows this. A man of extraordinary talent and genuine vision allowed financial desperation to open a door that should never have been opened. The workers who trusted him paid the price. The investors who believed him paid the price. And the car, the beautiful, strange stainless steel car, outlived the scandal, the bankruptcy, and the man himself, still rolling through car shows and movie screens, carrying the weight of everything it might have been. If you like our content, please like and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you next time on Torque City.